What's up, college sports fans? I'm Stucky.
I'm Colin Wilson.
I'm Mike Calabrese.
I'm Maria Marino.
I'm Charlie DiSturco, and we're excited that the Big Bets on Campus brand is launching its very own YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find every episode of the BBOC podcast, live shows, and other college sports content on this new channel.
Not only will the channel be dedicated to betting on college sports, but you'll also be able to find exclusive interviews with former college athletes,
college football power rankings,
and updates on other topics like the brand new College Football 25 video game series and the ins and outs of the recruiting trail all the way down to the transfer portal.
Whether you're into college football,
college basketball,
college baseball, or any of the college sports,
we are the home for college sports, and BBOC is the channel for you.
Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. I'll see you there.
Welcome into the Action Network podcast. We are presented by BetMGM. Brendan Glasheen in the host chair, joined by Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward here for a UFC betting preview. We make our way to Abu Dhabi for UFC Fight Night. We'll dive right in. We'll get to the guys' fight of the night, favorite underdog, top props, and then some best bets. And we'll get you out of here and get you ready for Saturday in Abu Dhabi. Main card is on ABC starting at 3 p.m. Eastern. You don't have to, well, locally, they're not going to be up in the wee hours of the morning, like last week, as we discussed. So let's dive in. We've got the bantamweight main event, Cory Sandhagen and Umar Nurmagomedov, who is the favorite at minus 340. I think the total rounds at 4.5. Yes. Sean Zerillo, what do you make of this matchup? And how would you like to bet it?
I think this is the most intriguing fight the UFC's put on in a number of months. I don't know if Billy agrees with that sentiment. It's just a very intriguing fight, though. Relatively binary on paper, I guess. Umar, the better grappler. Cory, the better striker. Cory is also taller and longer, 3 inches taller, 1 inch reach advantage. Longer reach with his legs, and he's the better kicker. So I think that reach is going to be more pronounced when they're standing at range, just because he's going to be able to kick Umar where Umar is not going to be able to touch him at range. Cory just has a longer reach, but I think it's even more pronounced than that 1 inch when you factor in the legs. Now, both of these guys have a number of finishes in their recent fights. I think the fight to go the distance, though, is the best bet I can make on this bout. At about minus 120, I projected this closer to minus 140. Sandhagen's recent stoppages, he had a cut stoppage over Sandhagen. He knocked out an old chinny Frankie Edgar. He knocked out an old chinny Marlon Moraes, who lasts 5 minutes in all of his fights, and then is done. Now, those were beautiful knockouts, incredible techniques, flash KOs. But by and large, Cory is more of an attritional finisher. He doesn't have big one-shot KO power. Obviously, if anybody hits you with a flying knee, you're probably going to go out. Or a spinning wheel kick, you're probably going to go out. But he doesn't particularly have huge one-shot power. He's more so of a guy who's going to put 25 strikes on you per round, rack up 100, 150 strikes over the course of a 5-round fight, and put a ton of damage on you while he's doing it. As I said, the cut stoppage on Sandhagen, he often is beating his opponents to a pulp when he's able to put a ton of strikes on them, but not typically knocking them down repeatedly, more so just putting a ton of damage on them. So the damage battle favors Sandhagen, but the grappling upside, the control, the submission upside all goes to cousin Umar, who got dropped in his last fight and said after the fight he basically woke up on top of his opponent, grappling him. There was a short notice opponent. He was a big favorite. I don't know if he has the best chin. That was definitely a bit concerning, seeing him get wobbled and not remember it after the fighter, basically go out and then come back too. But consistently throughout his career, we've seen Cory Sandhagen struggle once he gets taken down. Now, his takedown defense has improved. He made TJ Dillashaw shoot about 20 attempts, only got a couple of them, controlled him for 8 minutes of that 25-minute fight, which probably ultimately swayed the decision, but didn't do insane damage or get close to a submission or anything, in those exchanges. I think Umar will get close to potentially finishing the fight on the ground. I think he's going to get to some dangerous positions, but I do think Sandhagen's defensive grappling is leveled up to a point. I think his offensive grappling has leveled up to a point where he can just be more competitive and more comfortable in the grappling here. And I think he can do well to keep this on the feet, keep it standing, and have a chance to win the fight. But I think Umar just has more upside to win, a quick submission or win more of a control-based decision and deserves that favoritism. Now, the line is blown out. Cory opened about plus 180. He's currently about plus 260. I think he's getting closer to being bettable because I would make this line about plus 280. So if you got plus 300 or better on Sandhagen, I'd be interested. I'm a little interested in his decision prop at about plus 650. I made that line plus 600, but the goes to decision or the over would be the ways I would bet this. I mentioned Cory's finishes, Umar's finishes. He KO'd Raoni Barcelos. It was a really wild sequence, but Barcelos is 40, another old, potentially chinny opponent, taken down by a KO. I think most of their finishes aren't necessarily repeatable and not repeatable against guys who are in their physical prime. So both pretty durable to me. I think Umar obviously likelier to get KO'd, Sandhagen likelier to get submitted, but I don't necessarily think it is as binary playing out as it looks on paper, and therefore I do like the over.
Billy, there's wind at the sails here for Sandhagen. He's won a couple fights in a row. His losses are only to UFC champions. I see in your luck ratings, right up actionnetwork.com, Action Network's UFC luck ratings that Billy puts out every week, that you might be intrigued for a spread bet, which would be taking potentially 5.5 rounds to Sandhagen. Is that still attractive to you, or does that still out of play?
So I was really hopeful on Monday that I would get plus 150, maybe even a little bit better on the Cory Sandhagen spread. The books are on top of that one. It was even money. It's not enough. There's too much of a difference, I should say, from his money line to be worth it. Those are harder to hit on 5-round fights because you basically need to win 40% of the rounds as opposed to 33% of the rounds in a 3-round fight. You just need one. So, yeah, not seeing that the way I had hoped it would come out. I really agree with Sean's point, especially the last thing you said about it's not really that binary of a fight. Like, Sandhagen is a very good grappler. We all assume Umar Nurmagomedov is Khabib because they have the same last name, but he's a more dynamic striker, I think, than Khabib ever was, and not as good of a grappler, like not as good of a pure wrestler, pure takedown artist that Khabib was. So it's a closer fight. It reminds me a lot of how I saw Bilal Edwards last week, where there's a big underdog. I think the price is somewhat not reflective of their actual skill set, but I have a hard time seeing the underdog winning. Obviously, Bilal came and won outright, but the spread bet there paid off nicely and, it was closer than we thought. I see kind of the same situation here. Sandhagen is not going to look like an almost 3-1 underdog once this fight happens. I have a hard time seeing him winning this outright, though, unless the cardio difference is what it could be, because Sandhagen has gone at least 4 rounds in 5 straight fights. We've never seen that happen with Nurmagomedov. Sean and I talk about it all the time. Repeatedly, grappling gets really difficult and wears you out, especially if you don't get those takedowns. You get the takedown, you get the control position, you get to rest a little bit. If he has to shoot 3 or 4 takedowns, if Nurmagomedov has to shoot 3 or 4 takedowns for every one he gets, he could win a round or two, but be absolutely gassed by the end of that. And we know Sandhagen usually builds throughout the fight. He's been great down the stretch. So 2 angles. You could go Sandhagen by decision, Sandhagen 4-5 decision split bets. Or, and this is my preference, just wait to bet him live, right? You're eliminating the risk of him just getting mauled on the ground in round 1, which is possible, if not probable, in this fight. And then if he survives those first couple rounds, you get a way better price. If Sandhagen wins round 1 or 2 and you get a worse price, that's okay too. You'll still get him at plus money, but you've also made it through the most dangerous part of the fight. So either way, I think that's the way I would play it. If you're not going to be around, it's kind of a weird time. Any of those late props are fine too, but I think it's a pretty good live betting spot. And again, read and react, right? If Umar gets all of his takedown and gets 4.5 minutes of control time in the first 2 rounds, probably won't go that route. But if he's shooting a ton, Sandhagen's getting back to his feet, landing at range, but still losing the round, this could be a perfect opportunity.
Yeah, I think if Umar finishes the fight via submission, or if he finishes in general, I would expect it to come under 1.5 rounds when they're both still relatively dry early in the fight. After that point, I think Cory is the much likelier finisher, and it's going to come down the stretch. If Umar, like TJ Dillashaw, goes 2 for 19 on takedown attempts, if he really struggles to get takedowns, but he's attempting 3 per round, 2 per round, yeah, he might gas out for the 4th or 5th round. So I like the live look there too, Billy.
Okay, let's go to the fight of the night. Another bantamweight that the guys have highlighted here, Marlon Chito Vera. He's the underdog taking on Deiveson Figueiredo at minus 140-ish. Zerillo, same question for you. How do you what do you make of this fight? I mean, right now it's the over-under on the rounds is at 2.5. So how do you assess this matchup, and how would you like to bet?
I think the likeliest finish here is Deiveson Figueiredo by submission. And you can get 12-1 on that bet. The books have his submission prop price shorter than his knockout prop. Now, typically, he's more of a knockout artist. He had crazy power when he fought at 125. Moving up to 135, I don't think he hits quite as hard, but he's still very technical. And Chito is one of the most durable fighters in the sport. So I doubt he's going to knock him out. I don't really like Chito in 3-round fights. He's such a slow starter. He typically gives away round 1, very much like Petr Yan. And when you're in a 3-round fight, if you're going to give away the first round, you have such thin margins to draw on. So I think Figgy gets out to a lead pretty consistently here, both on activity in the first round, but also with the grappling upside, because Chito has shown a susceptibility to getting taken down and held down throughout his career. And I think Figgy, his easiest path to victory here is to grapple. But also, I think he's likely to grapple. And if you look at Chito's fight history, go back through all of his opponents, he has not faced a grappler anywhere near this level in terms of submission finishing. He's faced guys who can wrestle. He has not faced guys who can finish fights with grappling like Figgy. And I really don't think anybody's actually tried to threaten Chito with submissions to finish it, because he's dangerous on the feet. And once they get on top of him, they want to lock things down and keep him on the ground and not actually go for, they're prioritizing position over actually attacking submissions and trying to finish the fight. I think Figgy's going to try to finish him on the mat. And I think he's going to have a decent chance of doing so, because really nobody's tried it. You know, I was surprised to look back through Chito's fight history and see, like, he just hasn't faced a grappler of this level. Now, he is bigger, he's taller. I think if they get stuck, or if Figueiredo allows this to stay at striking range for the large part of the fight, Chito absolutely has a chance of pulling the upset, because he probably throws a little bit more volume. He's going to be able to fight at longer range with the reach and also with his kicks. He's great kicks. And I think Figgy could just get a little bit frustrated trying to get inside and land hooks. But if he wants to pursue the grappling upside, if he wants to just turn this into a grappling match, I think Figgy covers this price pretty easily. It's just a matter of whether he pursues that game plan or not. And sometimes it is tough to bet on these guys to do something that they don't always do. And Figueiredo pursued grappling in his last fight. Looked great against Cody Garbrandt, ended up choking him out. Don't know if he's reliable necessarily to do that again. I think it's his best path to victory, but it's not something he always does. He likes to strike, and we'll see if he ends up doing that, especially if Chito isn't going to throw anything for round 1. He may feel just super comfortable on the feet. But I would expect at some point he grapples, and if he does, I think he has a good chance to cash this sub prop. So 12-1, big long odds, I think, worth the poke.
Billy, you have a better feeling on just taking a side?
Yeah, I do. I think Figueiredo, mainly for the reason Sean pointed out with Vera being willing to give away one round, you just can't do that in a 3-round fight. And that habit is hard to break, and almost sometimes it feels worse when you do break those habits, right? We'll see guys. Sean, you talked about Terrence McKinney with his first round thing, where like you get in your own head about this bad tendency of yours, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think there's a bit of that going on with Chito in recent fights. But yeah, I don't necessarily. I think that's a pretty fair price on Figueiredo's money line. He's got the grappling upside and is probably close to neutral, if not, the better striker as well. So the only way it really goes wrong is he's a little bit older. He's starting to slow down, but the mileage on Chito is ridiculous at this point. Like, he's just eaten so many strikes over the last couple of fights that between Figueiredo going up a weight class, which is kind of like dropping the years down a little bit, it's rolling back the odometer a little bit, and then Vera, he took 230 significant strikes against Sean O'Malley, 113 against Pedro Munoz, 128 against Sandhagen, and those are all within the last 15 months or something. So I don't love that about Chito. I could see him getting finished just because the durability can't last forever, right? You're going to hit that point at some point. Might not be now. I see the submission angle. That makes a ton of sense too, but I'm just laying the juice on Figueiredo and playing that one straight up.
All right. Very good. Let's move on to underdogs. What do you make of the card this week, Sean, for underdogs in Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, there's a few underdogs I like. 3 bets I placed, and Billy and I both have underdog best bets. So I think we're going to cover one for each other here in the section, and you can guess as to which is the best bet for either of us. So a couple underdogs for me. The one that's different for Billy, Rolando Bedoya against Jai Herbert. Bedoya 9 years younger and just way more volume. This is a guy who's going to land across 15 minutes more than 100 significant strikes pretty comfortably, whereas Jai Herbert across 15 minutes is going to get doubled up. He's going to land like 60 to 70 strikes at most. He's just too low volume. He has really nasty combinations when he lets them go. He has very quick hands, but I don't think he trusts his own cardio. And he also doesn't have a particularly good chin here either. So, Bedoya younger, much better hardware in terms of durability. And then also twice the volume. So I think pretty comfortably Bedoya. And Herbert doesn't grapple either. He's more of a pure kickboxing striker looking to finish people. And that's why he's so low volume. I think he's very confident in his power. He almost knocked out Ilia Topuria. But because of that confidence, he just doesn't throw enough. So across a 15-minute decision, I think Bedoya comfortably pulls away. Interested in Bedoya by decision, but I think Herbert is a very wonky chin, so wouldn't be surprised with a KO either. So Bedoya, anything plus 110, plus 105 or better, looks good to be there. And then as far as my other underdog, 4 best underdogs, we're going to go with Lupi Godinez at about plus 106. I think she should be favored against Mackenzie Dern. She's the better wrestler. She's the better striker. Dern is discussed being more reliant on her grappling in this fight. She's gotten stuck kickboxing, brawling in her recent fights when she is a grappling-oriented fighter, a world champion jiu-jitsu practitioner. But she doesn't have great wrestling. And I do think Lupi has, 1, the better offensive wrestling, but 2, enough defensively to deny her and keep this fight standing. And when Dern has those takedown attempts denied in recent fights, she just starts swinging wildly and starts like flailing and spinning and doing all sorts of really awkward stuff on the feet that looks very bad from a judge's perspective, looks very bad from a fan perspective, because it just looks like she's literally getting scared and flailing. And she might be. I mean, she's been hurt badly in recent fights, and I assume doesn't want to keep taking that damage and gets a little skittish once she can't get the takedowns, because now she's stuck in her opponent's realm. So I'd expect her to be a little bit more proactive pursuing the grappling in this fight. I just don't think she's going to have success with it. And I think Godinez has her covered in terms of being able to dictate where the fight takes place. If Dern gets this down, she's going to be a threat to finish the fight. But otherwise, I think it's Lupi's fight to lose, and I give her the advantage in 2 out of 3 aspects of MMA. So Lupi Godinez at about plus 106, and then Alejandro Bedoya at plus 120. Sorry, Rolando Bedoya. I don't know why in my head he's Alejandro Bedoya. I feel like there must be another athlete out there whose name is Alejandro Bedoya, because it's a soccer player. Okay. So I'm not crazy. There is an Alejandro Bedoya who I believe played for Team USA, but Rolando Bedoya is the MMA fighter we're betting on.
That time of year with the Olympics. Understandable.
There's a lot of UFC fighters who have the same surname as professional athletes from other sports. And for some reason, like, I always want to default to calling them, the name that I'm more familiar with from pre-MMA days. So yeah, it's always a fun game I get to play in my head.
Yeah, as Sean said, stay tuned. We'll have some underdog crossover into best bets. Billy, you've got 2 different ones though than Sean for now.
Yeah, I mean, we're actually both betting each other's picks primarily here. And I was close on Bedoya, and then when I saw Sean put this in the show sheet, I ran out and bet it myself, because I just needed someone to give me permission, basically. And I'm kicking myself for not getting the better lines earlier in the week, but love that one as well. 2 I'm looking at, one is Muhammad Yahya versus Cowy Fernandez. Both guys are 0-1 in the UFC. They both lost decisions in their debut. One guy, Muhammad Yahya, is like more than a 3-1 underdog. His nickname is the UAE Warrior. He's from Dubai. He's the only local fighter they have on this card. Clearly, the UFC thinks this is at least an okay matchup for him. They don't bring in the one local fighter to get him slaughtered. That's not how any of this works. That's not how it's ever worked. It doesn't mean he's going to win. It doesn't mean he's the better fighter. I just don't see him as a 3-1 underdog in this. It doesn't make any sense to me. His debut was against Trevor Peek, and he looked kind of bad against Trevor Peek. But that was the fight where Trevor Peek decided he was a wrestler all of a sudden after being a wild brawler up until that point. Had I been his coach, had I been that fighter, and Trevor Peek shot a takedown on me, I would have thrown my hands up and given up too. Like, nobody prepared for that. We had no idea it was going to happen. Nobody knew Trevor Peek even knew how to spell takedown before that fight. So, like, I'm going to give him a pass on that is where I'm going with all that. Cory Fernandez lost a split decision to Mark Diakiese. Arguably could have won it, but he didn't comfortably look better, right? Also with, some suffering a little bit in the wrestling department against a fighter who didn't historically do that. I just don't see this wide of a split between them. One guy's plus 300. Crazy line, in my opinion. And then the other one, which Sean will also get to later, is Michal Oleksiejczuk at plus 210. I'm basically just fading the Shara Bullet hype here. I think it's gone a little bit too far for a guy with one eye and two hand-picked matchups so far in the UFC. They gave him Bruno Silva, who is the UFC's like, oh, we've got a cool kickboxer. Let's give him a good matchup. They call Bruno Silva when that happens. And Bruno Silva took him down 3 times, which is not a good sign for Shara Bullet. Oleksiejczuk, he has 6 losses in the UFC. 5 of them are submissions. He does not need to worry about that here. He's also a former 205er who can crack. Has never been knocked down despite fighting much bigger opponents. Shara Bullet, former welterweight, coming up. I think I said it to Sean in our private Slack or somewhere else last fight that I think he'd do better as a welterweight in the UFC. His power just doesn't quite seem to play up. He does a lot of touching you, but not a lot of hurting you. And then he can't grapple to save his life. So Oleksiejczuk has the grappling advantage. Might not use it, probably won't use it. But then it's, in my opinion, roughly a coin flip on the feet between one guy who's going to land volume, one guy who's going to do damage. It's pretty much the same thing as G-Rod versus Christian Leroy Duncan last week with the hyped prospect and the guy who, can hang in the striking and do better in the grappling. Oleksiejczuk's grappling is nowhere near G-Rod's. But that's why we're getting plus 210 instead of plus 120. So I'll take that one all day. Sean's also going to go a little bit deeper on that shortly.
Where do we see value in the prop market, Sean, for Abu Dhabi?
Billy and I are on the same page here. Azamat Murzakanov to win inside the distance is how I'm playing it at about plus 120. And I also like his round 2 and round 3 props at about plus 600 and plus 900 respectively. Slightly worse numbers out there I would still take. But Murzakanov is undefeated. Menifield, typically a round 1 finisher. And then his cardio fades after 5 minutes. And traveling over to Abu Dhabi, it's going to take a lot out of him. I do not see Menifield being effective here for more than a few minutes of this fight. He's also in his late 30s as well. It continues to get older. He actually looked okay up until his last fight too. Like, it seemed like his cardio was improving. He was able to get through 15-minute fights, and then he was immediately iced by Carlos Ulberg. Now, the chin is certainly a concern for him surviving to round 2, but I expect kind of his typical approach where he's dangerous for a round. Murzakanov may back off a little bit, allow him to gas himself out. And then I think he turns it on, finishes him in round 2 or round 3. Murzakanov, you see in his career record, typically builds to a 3rd round finish, but he's throwing the same heat roughly throughout. I just think he's able to sustain his style. He doesn't look great either cardio-wise at round 3 against most of his opponents. He's a big dude. He's a wide dude for heavyweight or light heavyweight, but he's actually kind of short. So he's like this short, stocky frame, and it doesn't seem like he necessarily is carrying his cardio well, but he's still knocking people out in round 3 and throwing like cool techniques, flying techniques. So he seems to sustain it. And I just think he has a big cardio advantage here on top of the fact that he's the more dangerous fighter for the final 10 minutes. So like that inside the distance prop, but I think I really like it in rounds 2 and rounds 3 at juicier odds. And this just seems like the UFC giving him an opportunity to get another finish for his record and keep ascending up the light heavyweight rankings because he's pretty old to be, he's only 13-0, 14-0, and he's already 36, 35. So they need to move him along as quickly as possible and try to get him into the rankings and moving up the rankings as quickly as they can because the window is relatively limited. If they want him to fight for a title, it's within the next 2 years or so.
All right, Billy, and there's another way you'd like to play Azamat, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's mostly the same logic as Sean, but I'm just taking the knockout at plus 140, covering all the rounds. Not much that Sean didn't hit on. The one thing, or a couple things I'll point out. Murzakanov at least has scored a knockdown in every promotional appearance, including his last one against Dustin Jacoby. Jacoby made it to the bell. I feel like people sleep on Justin Jacoby as one of the elite technical strikers in the sport, but he continues to be. And if you look good on the feet against Justin Jacoby, that's a really good sign. More importantly, though, Alonzo Menifield got knocked out in 12 seconds like 3 months ago. Not even 3 full months. It's a weirdly quick turnaround time given how bad he looked, getting pummeled by Olberg. So that's what pushed me on knockout, just because I don't think he's fully recovered there. It seems like usually guys that take at least 4-ish months, and this isn't 3 full ones. So that certainly doesn't help. And then, Sean pointed out Menifield is about a year older, a year and a half older. If you looked at pictures of these guys, you would 100% get that wrong, though. Azamat Murzakanov looks like he's 48 years old, but he's actually like a year and a half younger than Menifield. So don't let the appearances fool you. He's the younger man here with less miles as well, right? A few less pro fights. And never been beaten, so obviously hasn't been knocked out either.
Okay, and best bets, as we teased, these guys are taking from each other and sharing. Or as Billy said, they're giving each other permission. I like that way he worded it earlier. So, Sean, you'd like to echo one of Billy's dogs from earlier.
Yeah, Michal Oleksiejczuk. I almost went consensus best bet here with Billy because he had his stuff in the sheet first. But if I was to place one bet on this card, it'd be Michal Oleksiejczuk. Now, lost his last 2 fights pretty quickly, both via submission. That, as Billy said, not going to be an issue for him here. Shara Bullet is not going to grapple him. This is, for all intents and purposes, a boxer against a kicker. And Shara, I don't really like his hands. I think he's the liability defensively. He's getting put in Hollywood movies as a villain. He is the ultimate hype train right now, but I don't think he's a particularly good fighter. I think he has some nice flashy kicks. That's about it. McCall, big power, came down, former light heavyweight or middleweight, now welterweight, but came down in class. And that power has shown itself, has a ton of round 1 finishes on his record throughout his career. But it's not like he can't win decisions. He's 4-1 on the scorecards. The cardio down a weight class, not as great as it would be, without cutting the weight. But that said, I still think he has a serious chance not only to win this fight early and win in round 1 like he typically does, and you can certainly sprinkle his round 1 odds at 9-1, 10-1, because that is typically how he wins. And he's probably going to pressure Shara. And I would imagine he has a handshake agreement with the UFC to make Shara fight, because Shara basically in his past 2 fights hasn't fought. He's just stood on the outside and kicked his opponents and hasn't engaged. And he was favored, or his shortest odds were to win by knockout or to win inside the distance in both of those fights. Could have probably never really pursued it. So, this is a guy who's had legal problems for like beating people up in public. He's seemingly more aggressive in public than he is once he's in the cage. It's very odd. But I think he's flashy, and I think he's a hype train, and I don't think he's particularly good. Now, I would have loved to have bet against him with a guy who can actually grapple or who will proactively offensively grapple, even if they're not particularly good at it. This is going to be a striking fight, but I still don't think it is anything less than a competitive striking fight, especially early. And I actually tend to lean more towards the overs or the fight to go to a decision, because even though I do think Michal will make Shara fight, I still think there's the likelihood that they just sort of strike it out for 15 minutes and that nobody ultimately falls. I think Michal is more vulnerable to the body than he is to the head. So maybe those kicks, maybe Shara lands a body kick and puts him down or something like that. But yeah, by and large, I think Oleksiejczuk is going to be landing more head strikes. I think he has the higher likelihood of winning by KO. And I don't think Shara is going to attack him in the grappling, where he is by far weakest and where he is like almost incompetent compared to his striking skills. So yeah, clear plus 210 on Michal Oleksiejczuk. I think this fight is a coin flip on the feet. I think he has vastly more UFC experience. Obviously, there's an age differential, but I'll take the puncher over the kicker in pretty much any fight. It just judges prefer punches.
And Billy will wrap with Loopy as to why you're going to support Sean's bet that you had said earlier that you have received permission to do so.
Before I jump on that one, though, what age differential are you referring to?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking Shar is younger. They're the same age. It's more the damage differential and the fact that Michal is like, did he get his arm broken against Kevin Holland? He refused to tap out to that arm bar. Is he coming in here with like a mangled arm, and one arm that works? That's that's the concern for me. Is he got kicked in the body by Michel Pereira, fell to the ground, choked out. I think he got his arm snapped by Kevin Holland. Now he's coming back a few months later. So I'm worried a bit about the physical stuff. But beyond that, I think he's probably the better fighter.
I kind of am too, but we're bearing the lead a little bit here. Shara Bullet has one eye. Like, he literally can't see out of one of his eye. So when you talk about his striking defense, yeah, I mean, if you can only see punches from half the side, and we're worried about Mikhail's physical tools, but like, he has use of sight in all directions.
He can't fight in most of the. First off, he can't get a visa to come to the U.S. because he's assaulting people in Dagestan. But also, he wouldn't be allowed to fight in a lot of jurisdictions of the U.S. because you need two eyes to be able to fight. Michael Bisping, had to stop fighting because there was nowhere he could fight in the U.S. So yeah, it's a physical issue that he has to overcome in all of his fights. And again, another thing that helps a guy punching as opposed to kicking.
And Olajaychuk is the first UFC southpaw he's fought. I'm not sure which eye it is off the top of my head, but if it's your right eye and coming on the left. But yeah, so there's a lot to like about Michal, basically. That's why, I had as my favorite underdog. Sean has his best bet. Looping back to Lupi Godinez, who Sean mentioned earlier, I think the best you can get is even money now. I put it in the luck ratings when she was plus 110. Loved that. But yeah, I fully agree with Sean. It's a jiu-jitsu fighter versus a wrestler, where the jiu-jitsu fighter really wants the things to be on the ground, and the wrestler won't let her get it there. I don't think Lupi's a great striker, but compared to how we've seen Mackenzie Dern lately, I think she's a lot better than that. Only thing I wanted to add, I should have mentioned this with prop. Lupi has never gotten a knockout in her career, but Mackenzie Dern has been dropped 5 times over her last 2 fights, and that chin just might be gone. So if we think Lupi keeps this standing, and she's the better boxer, which I don't think you can really argue with either of those assertions, 14-1 on a knockout, I love that. So I put 9/10 of a unit on Lupi at plus 110 to win roughly 1 unit, and then sprinkled 0.1 on her knockout prop. Because if there's ever going to be a time. The other thing I should point out for the knockout, Mackenzie Dern is booked to compete in a pretty high-profile grappling match 2 weeks from now. And I'm not a big believer in the MMA gods, but if there's one thing the MMA gods hate, it's hubris. And booking yourself in another competition 2 weeks from now with an MMA fight in between, it just feels like one of those things that always goes wrong in this sport. And a knockout from Lupi would be the way to make that go wrong. So I'm half kidding with that, but sometimes when you look past your opponent, you invite more of that. And if she's training for a grappling competition and her striking's already suspect, also probably not a great sign. So love the Lupi money line, a little bit of sprinkle on the knockout. And yeah, totally in agreement with Sean's read on that otherwise.
One of the quickest ways you could see a striking efficiency, add up striking accuracy percentage, striking defense percentage. You want fighters generally who are over 101 combined. Lupi's at 111, 48% offense, 63% defense. Really good defensive striker. Dern is at 91, 40% of her strikes landed, 51% striking defense. She's a punching bag. She also has a lot of trouble hitting her opponents. There's a 20% differential in combined striking accuracy and defense. Normally, the gap is like 3 to 5% between opponents. 20% is massive. This isn't even close on the feed. So, yeah, I like that Lupi KO look, Billy. I think that's interesting at long odds. I hope that's in a prop squad this week.
The difference would probably be even larger if you removed all of Dern's ground strikes as well. Because she's, like, arguably the best jiu-jitsu competitor ever in the UFC in terms of credentials at the very least. Like, no gi world champ, championships at different levels, been training since she was like 3 or 4, right? Unquestionable grappling credentials. Most of the strikes she lands are on the ground too. You take all those out, it's even worse. You could say a little bit the same about Lupi because she's a good wrestler, but I would bet if you remove ground strikes, the discrepancy gets even wider.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Just, that's a little quick, interesting reference stat you can find just by combining those numbers because, typically when fighters have lower accuracy, they have higher defense. It means they're just further away from their opponents. Right. But typically, like if their striking accuracy is at 50%, their defense is closer to 50% because it means they're more in the pocket and likelier to get hit. So just a quick little efficiency reference number. But you don't normally see a gap that large between two fighters. That really caught my attention. The striking defensive stats, normally you see a difference in one stat, right? Like a fighter may defend strikes at 60%, the opponent at 50%, but their striking accuracy maybe the same. It's not a huge advantage for one fighter typically in both areas, and here it is.
Is there a chance Loopy becomes out of range as far as the price?
Past minus 105 is where I'd stop betting her. I make her a favorite. I made her about 53%, but yeah, I wouldn't take past minus 105. I know Billy got closer to plus 120. I took about plus 106. So
Yeah.
it seems to be continuing to tick in her direction. But I think a pick'em price is fine, minus 105. I wouldn't really go much past that.
Okay.
I'd probably go a little bit further. I'm fairly confident in this one. But you could also, like, if you're worried about it, juice it up with the same game parlay, add a couple minutes to it, right? Because if Loopy does get a knockout finish, I really don't think it's going to be on one big punch. It's going to be because she's wearing her down over the fight. So add over half a round or over, 3 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
That'll be enough that would push it back to plus money anyway. So
Yeah, if
get
there's
creative.
a finish inside of 2.5 minutes, it's Dern. It's Dern
Right.
via submission. That's the quick finish in this fight. So yeah, loopy iterations with overs, right? Like you said, the over half a round, over a round.
All right. Very good. Again, main card from Abu Dhabi starts on at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, ABC. Prelims at noon over on ESPN2, the ESPN family of networks. That concludes our UFC betting preview. For Sean Zerillo, Billy Ward, find those guys in the free award-winning Action Network app. Should they add anything live? I know that's really a quick turnaround. Those are tough to kind of get around to. But if you are populating in the app, have a look at those guys as the card gets underway tomorrow afternoon. Thanks for tuning in to this UFC betting preview on the Action Network podcast. We are presented by BetMGM. You'll have a great weekend. Best of luck.